The Young Turks have started an activism group known as the TYT Army, and they've launched an initiative dubbed the Progressive Pledge.
The goal is to institute a constitutional amendment that would ban the private financing of candidates, resulting in free and fair elections. And joining us to expand on what the TYT Army is and what the Progressive Pledge is all about is Young Turks host and founder, Cenk Uygur. He joins us via Skype. Great to see you, sir.
Great to see you guys.
So what are you up to? It's a big question, right?
Yeah, just trying to influence the presidential campaign and eventually change the country and the world. That's all.
No biggie, as per usual. No, so what's in the pledge?
Okay, so you can see the entire pledge if you go to tyt.com/pledge. See TYT right there.
Yeah,
okay.
There we go.
So there's 5 pillars to it. First is higher wages, so $15 minimum wage, collective bargaining, and most importantly, don't take corporate PAC money because we want you to represent the average American worker and not your corporate donors. So pledge plank number 2 is Medicare for all, not public option, not Medicare for some, Medicare for all. Green New Deal, and there's only 2 parts of the Green New Deal here. Rebuild the entire energy infrastructure of the country, create millions of jobs doing that, and get off of fossil fuels in 10 years. A plan to do that. So number 4 is college for all, and number 5 is the amendment to end private financing. So, some people want to call it a litmus test. God bless, go forward. I don't mind if you call it a litmus test. What it really means is there's 24 candidates here. They're not running for Senate. They're not running for Congress. They're running for the most important job in the country. So why not pick the person who most aligns with you? And for most progressives, these are the bare minimum, the core of what it means to be a progressive economic.
So, Cenk, which of the candidates right now already fall within your Progressive Pledge? They may not have signed on to it, but who right now is in the race that already abides by the principles that you've set out?
So, first of all, 3 of them have signed it. So, Bernie Sanders,
Yep.
Marianne Williamson, and Mike Gravel. I think that another 3 are entirely possible, and looking forward to what they're going to say about it. Bill de Blasio, Tulsi Gabbard, and Elizabeth Warren. Some have already chosen not to sign it, and there's nothing wrong with that. The point of this is just for clarity, okay? So John Delaney says, no, I don't agree with those issues like Medicare for all, and he had a great, thoughtful answer to it. We really, really appreciate that. Have had meaningful conversations with Congressman Delaney on that. Andrew Yang disagreed with it because he thinks his proposals are more progressive in some ways, but he explained that. So others like John Hickenlooper, who thinks that Medicare for all means we're bringing back Stalin, is obviously not going to sign it, right? And
Seems unlikely.
Dramatically surprised if Amy Klobuchar did. But I honestly don't know, and that's part of the point of this, what Gillibrand's going to do, Booker's going to do, Kamala Harris is going to do, because I think they ostensibly agree with those things, so be curious to see which side they're on. And right now there's already over 16,000 signatures on it from the public, so that's 16,000 people saying, I'm going to vote for the person who agrees with this pledge, and I'm not going to vote for someone who doesn't. That number will probably get to 100, if we're really good, 250,000. That's a lot of people and a lot of votes at stake here.
And you're doing something also interesting with the TYT Army, basically, again, trying to get some clarity on where all of these candidates stand on the most important issues. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and so what we're doing is we're asking people after they sign the pledge, if all you want to do is sign the pledge at tyt.com/pledge, great, check it out, see if you like it. It takes about 5 seconds, right? But if you want to go to the next level, you can volunteer. So, and it could be as simple as just participating. Somebody texts you and says there's going to be an event in your area, do you want to come? Or you could be an organizer. And already we've had over 8,000 volunteers. So what would the volunteers do? Well, they would go to presidential events. They'd go to town halls, debates. In fact, we're going to go to Miami next. So if you want to find out more about that, tyt.com/rally. And we're going to be in front of the presidential debates, just like we did at the Hall of Fame dinner in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And that's where we got the 3 signatures, because public pressure works. When people say, hey, I'm either going to vote with you or against you based on this pledge, it gives people an incentive to at least take a look at it. And by the way, already it's worked. We had someone in the TYT Army who's a representative in the state of New Hampshire, and he was at lunch with Governor Inslee. He turned on his phone and asked Governor Inslee to take the pledge. It's amazing. It's
Wow.
everywhere.
Well, no question your power and reach in the Progressive Party. I want to get your thoughts on 2020 broadly. To me and to Crystal, we've been talking a lot about this on the show, how it seems like a two-path choice. One is Joe Biden. The other are many of the candidates you mentioned, particularly the ones who have signed your pledge. But the polls seem to be indicating that many of the older voters in these caucuses are going with the Joe Biden because they want to return to a familiarity of 2012. What is your message to those voters?
Don't make the same mistake we made in 2016. So all of the media told you that Hillary Clinton was the more electable candidate. The polls showed the opposite, but the media said, no, don't believe your lying eyes, believe in my alternative facts instead. And we were right and they were wrong. And the only way to lose to Trump is if you run a mainstream candidate that appears to be, to the average person, an elitist. Now, why? It's not because Hillary Clinton didn't have a good smile and Joe Biden does, and that'll make all the difference. I'm not naive. It might make a little difference. But the main issue is policy. What Hillary Clinton said was, I'm not going to give you any hope. I'm going to give you the status quo, and I think we're not going to go for any big change. What is Joe Biden saying? The same exact thing. We're not going to go for any big change. We're just going to go back to a pre-Trump era. And I know that might sound seductive for a second, but the reality is wages have not risen in this country for 40 years. That's why the number one pledge, pillar in our pledge is higher wages, and not just for people making minimum wage. You have to deliver for the average American worker. And Joe Biden basically says, I'm going to do nothing for 4 years. That is a losing strategy. We already ran that race. Do not make that same mistake. Vote for a progressive who's going to say, I'm going to fight for you.
So, Cenk, if we play that on even a little bit further, I think there's a good chance Biden ends up being the nominee. Democrats have a very poor track record in terms of the nominees that they pick. And I think there is a chance that he then goes on to beat Trump, although I agree with you. I don't think he's the strongest choice if you're just looking at electability. But let's say that he wins the White House. What do you think that administration looks like, and what do you think the consequences are?
I think the consequences, honestly, are terrible. Don't get me wrong. If it's Biden versus Trump in the general election, that's the biggest no-brainer of my life. I will definitely vote for Biden. And anyone who doesn't, I think, is mental. Not because Biden's great, as I'm about to explain, but because Trump is an absolute disaster. He doesn't believe in our form of government. If you give him 4 more years, this democracy might not even survive. And I don't think that's hyperbole. I think he's going to start locking up his political opponents. He said that over and over again. And when he says things like that, he usually, unfortunately, delivers on his promises of being a tyrant and a demagogue. So now, in terms of if Biden wins, though, I know exactly where to get. Nothing. He's not going to propose anything bold. He says it. I mean, it's not me saying it. It's him saying it. He's not going to go for Medicare for all. He's not going to go for Green New Deal. He's not going to get money out of politics. He might nominally be for $15 minimum wage. I mean, by God, that is the bare minimum. And that's what corporate Democrats do. They do the bare minimum, and then they reach across the aisle, and they do a bipartisan agreement with Mitch McConnell, which usually helps the incredibly rich and powerful who are the donors of both Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell. And the rest of us get screwed. And then at the end of that 4 years of absolutely nothing and the planet burning, then the right wing will put up another demagogue, another one who's a fake populist and will make false promises. And this one might actually be smart, unlike Donald Trump. And then God help us all.
Cenk, another thing I want to get your thoughts on is the branding of democratic socialism. Bernie Sanders had a landmark address. Crystal and I were actually there yesterday, and we spoke with David Sirota. Bernie has wrapped himself in the warm embrace of the words democratic socialism. I've seen it pointed out by Lee Fang of The Intercept that Elizabeth Warren might actually be taking a better tactic, but she's calling herself an economic patriot. That's language which is same basically on policy-wise, but is familiar to middle Americans. And do you think that the word socialism is too scary to have Bernie Sanders elected?
No, I don't. Look, but I take your point. First of all, I want to give you guys credit for being at the speech, which sets you above many of the other so-called journalists in Washington, and for covering it seriously. The bias of the rest of the establishment media is overwhelming. The fact that they openly deride Bernie Sanders and pretend to be objective is hilarious and ridiculous and damaging to our democracy. The media, in a sense, rigged the elections with billions of dollars of free media coverage that is positive for the establishment candidates and negative for progressives more than the DNC does, more than the Russians do. They rig it more than anybody does. Now, in terms of the word democratic socialism versus, I mean, look, I really like Elizabeth Warren. I think she's a wonderful progressive. I think economic patriotism, it's a little goofy. I mean, it's an obvious political wordplay, right? In terms of democratic socialism, I call myself a capitalist, but I don't want to tweak capitalism. I think that right now it's absolutely runaway corporate socialism. I think it's crony capitalism. The system is absolutely broken and needs to be repaired. But so I would, whether you want to reform capitalism in a significant way or call it democratic socialism, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the policies. And so what Bernie Sanders is proposing is that we be a little bit closer to Norway. So what's the big difference between what we call capitalism in America and what they call democratic socialism in Northern Europe? They provide childcare, healthcare insurance by the government, and paid family leave. Wow, what a big difference. It's not a big difference at all, and it's just a little bit more humane. Our system is quite barbaric at this point.
Well, and I thought it was smart the way, and this isn't the first time he's done this, but it was sort of most fully articulated in his recent speech. But he put it in the American context, right? Basically, we got to finish the work of the New Deal, which FDR was never able to. And we are at a very similar moment with the rise of right-wing authoritarianism. And our answer at that time under FDR was to, in FDR's words, become fairly radical for a generation in order to provide real tangible benefits for people so that they weren't lured into this reactionary movement that we saw around the globe. And we had that here as well. So to me, after however many years Bernie Sanders has been calling himself a democratic socialist, if he was then now to go and be like, well, actually, I'm not really that, I'm an economic patriot or whatever, I think it would be kind of transparent that that was just pandering.
Yeah, and so the other day I was on CNN with Ana Navarro, and she called Bernie Sanders a stubborn old goat. And obviously she meant it as an insult. She's in mainstream media. Everyone hates Bernie Sanders in mainstream media. But in some ways, it's a compliment. You cannot move the guy. He's a rock. He's been in favor of universal health care coverage for 40 years. He's been in favor of gay marriage for 40 years. He's been in favor of civil rights for 50 years. And the list goes on and on. And his followers don't find that as a problem. They find that as the solution. So, yeah, he's not going to get cute and say, oh, it's not democratic socialism anymore. My consultants told me to call it something else. He's just going to tell you why it's the better system. And that's what people really appreciate. And Navarro should check Urban Dictionary, too. GOAT is also the greatest of all time.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. You know, Cenk, there's this kind of like Twitter debate going on right now among progressives about who's more progressive, Bernie or Warren, or are they the same? Are they different? What are your thoughts there? I mean, are there substantive policy differences? Or beyond policy differences, are there substantive differences in sort of the theory of political change between the two of them?
Yeah, so almost everybody in the media has a preconceived notion of everything, including what I believe. What would be nice if they asked, like you guys just did. So I haven't made up my mind, and I told our audience, for God's sake, keep an open mind, hear everyone out. And we were the first national show to have Andrew Yang on, and now he's surging. And he told Cory Booker when we were in Iowa together, you're crazy if you don't go on. These guys give you a huge bump. And we've seen almost every candidate go up by about a point after they come on our program. And we give them a fair hearing. We hear them out for a long time. Even people we disagree with. You check out our conversation with Tim Ryan and John Delaney, some of the more substantive conversations with the candidates. Now, in terms of who I'm supporting, well, look, I really love Elizabeth Warren's policy initiatives. She's fought for things in the past like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She's gotten billions of dollars back for the American people, showed incredible courage in fighting the banks when none of the other corporate Democrats wanted to do it. And her colleagues told her to cut it out, and nevertheless she persisted. And that was not just against McConnell, that was also against Chuck Schumer, okay? So on the other hand, Bernie Sanders is more clearly in favor of Medicare for all, more clearly in favor of ending what appears to be the endless wars, the aggressive wars, the offensive wars. So and he's a stubborn goat. If anyone is going to fight for these progressive policies, it is probably Bernie Sanders, and not going to give a damn what Joe Manchin thinks. So it's a really close contest and a fascinating one. And that's not to discount the other progressives in the race who also really interesting and wonderful ideas.
Final question for you, Cenk. Do you worry about there's too many candidates in the race and that it's going to hand it to Joe Biden? Something I've been talking a lot about is in 2016, only 30% of primary voters in the initial states voted for Trump. 70% were split between this massive 16 numbers of candidates. Do you worry as a progressive that the progressive voices will get shut down because Biden has such a rock-solid base of his 20-25% while everybody else is bleeding from each other?
Yeah. No, I'm not too worried about that. Right now, a lot of people are concerned about that, and it's the exact right question to ask. So obviously, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are splitting the progressive vote. If they were together, that'd be a solid 35 points, and it'd probably be a cakewalk to the presidency. But to be fair, neither one of them right now has a claim to be president and not vice president, right? And so I don't know if they're ever going to do that. But remember, the establishment is also going to split up their vote. So do not make the same mistake that the Republicans made in 2016, where they constantly attacked each other instead of the real threat. So if I'm a progressive, I'm running against Joe Biden. I'm not worried about Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or anyone else. I'm going to tell the American people why Joe Biden represents the status quo. He represents the same mistake we made in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. And I'm not going to attack my fellow progressives. I think that's a really bad idea. Remember, Biden is going to come down. People have no idea how conservative he is. And they're going to find out through the debates. And right now, he's hiding Biden. And once he comes out of hiding, and he actually says one policy, every time he says something about policy, his poll numbers go down because he's
true.
For these times. So Biden and Kamala Harris and Buttigieg, et cetera, will also split up the establishment vote. I actually think Andrew Yang is going to make it into the top 6. So then we're going to have 3 interesting candidates and 3 establishment candidates. They're all going to split up the vote, and no one knows who's going to win. And this is really exciting.
Yeah. I've known Andrew for a long time. He's a good dude. He's a sharp thinker. I think he's thinking big, which is important. I do want to take issue, though. We had him on this show as well, so I want to take credit for part of that Andrew Yang bump. Okay, Cenk?
That's true. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Great to see
Thanks,
you,
Cenk.
sir.
We really appreciate it.
Talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you, guys.
And we'll have more Rising after this.